The morning mist clung to the hills surrounding Camp Ridgeway like a shroud, thick and gray in the pre-dawn darkness. Through that veil of fog, a figure emerged at the main gate, barely visible in the pale glow of the security lights. She stood, no taller than 5 feet 2 inches, her frame so slight that the standard-issue combat boots seemed too large for her feet, and the tactical vest hung loose across her narrow shoulders, despite being adjusted to its smallest setting. Maya Chen stepped through the checkpoint with her deployment papers clutched in one hand and a worn duffel bag slung over the other, her black hair pulled back in a regulation bun that somehow made her appear even smaller against the imposing concrete barriers that flanked the entrance. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The guard barely glanced up from his clipboard as he processed her arrival, his eyes scanning the paperwork with the mechanical indifference of someone who had seen countless new recruits pass through these gates. When he did look at her, his expression shifted to barely concealed surprise, then something that might have been concern or perhaps amusement. He stamped her papers with more force than necessary and jerked his thumb toward the sprawling complex beyond the gate, where rows of utilitarian buildings stretched into the distance like dominoes arranged in perfect military precision. Maya nodded her thanks and walked forward, her footsteps nearly silent on the wet asphalt, leaving barely an impression in her wake. Camp Ridgeway was home to the 82nd Mountain Infantry Division, an elite unit known for operating in the most treacherous terrain on Earth. The soldiers here were legends in their own right, men and women forged in the crucible of high-altitude warfare, specialists in mountain rescue operations, cold weather survival, and vertical assault tactics. The base itself reflected this harsh reality, built into the foothills of the Cascade Range, where the air was thin and unforgiving, where every structure had to withstand brutal winters and sudden storms that could drop temperatures 40 degrees in as many minutes. It was not a place for the weak, the unprepared, or the small. As Maya made her way through the compound, she passed clusters of soldiers engaged in their morning routines. They moved with the confident swagger that came from knowing they belonged to something extraordinary, their voices carrying across the crisp air as they discussed weekend plans and shared inside jokes earned through shared hardship. Some were heading to the mess hall, others toward the equipment bays, where they would spend the day maintaining the specialized gear that kept them alive in impossible conditions. A few jogged past her in formation, their boots striking the ground. In perfect synchronization, their breathing controlled and steady despite the elevation and the pace they maintained. None of them paid her any attention at first, but as word began to spread that there was a new arrival, curious glances started following her progress across the base. She caught fragments of conversations as she passed, voices that carried just far enough for her to hear the questions being raised about her presence. Someone wondered aloud if she was lost. Another suggested she might be visiting family, and a third voice, louder than the rest, speculated that she must be part of the administrative staff being transferred in from the logistics center down the mountain. The briefing room where new personnel reported was located in the Central Command Building, a squat concrete structure that looked like it had been designed to withstand a direct artillery strike. Maya climbed the steps leading to the main entrance, her hand gripping the cold metal railing for support, not because she needed it physically, but because the weight of the stairs following her had grown heavier with each step. Inside, fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting everything in harsh white light that made the institutional green paint on the walls look even more depressing than it already was. Staff Sergeant Rodriguez was waiting for her behind a metal desk that had seen better decades, his weathered face bearing the kind of deep lines that came from years of squinting into mountain sun and wind. He was a compact man himself, built like a fire plug, with hands that looked like they could crush walnuts and a voice that had been roughened by shouting orders across windy peaks. When Maya approached his desk and presented her orders, he took them without looking up. His attention focused on a stack of other paperwork that seemed to demand more of his interest than yet another new recruit. It was only when he finally raised his eyes to match the name on the papers with the person standing before him that his expression changed. He blinked once, then twice, then set the papers down and leaned back in his chair with the slow deliberation of someone trying to process information that did not compute. He looked at Maya, then at the papers, then back at Maya again, as if expecting one or the other to suddenly transform into something that made more sense. "You're Chen?" he asked, his voice carrying a note of disbelief that he did not try to hide. "Yes, Sergeant," Maya replied, her voice steady and clear despite the anxiety that was building in her chest like a rising tide. Rodriguez picked up the papers again and read through them more carefully this time, his lips moving slightly as he worked through the details of her assignment. When he reached the section that outlined her requested specialization, his eyebrows climbed toward his hairline and stayed there. He set the papers down again and studied her with the kind of intense scrutiny usually reserved for enemy positions or unexploded ordnance. "Says here you're requesting assignment to search and rescue operations," he said, and there was something in his tone that suggested he thought there might be a clerical error involved. "That's correct, Sergeant. Mountain search and rescue," he clarified, emphasizing each word as though speaking to someone who might not fully understand what those terms meant when used together. "Yes, Sergeant." Rodriguez was quiet for a long moment, his fingers drumming against the desk as he continued to study her. When he finally spoke again, his voice had taken on the patient tone of someone explaining something to a child who had wandered into the wrong classroom. "Chen, I don't know what they told you at processing, but this isn't a desk job. This isn't filing reports or managing supply inventories. The men and women in this unit carry 100-pound packs up 60-degree slopes in weather that can kill you in minutes. They rappel down cliff faces to reach injured climbers and haul them back up using nothing but rope and muscle. They work in conditions where a single mistake means everyone on the team dies, not just the person who made the error." Maya listened to his explanation without interrupting, her expression remaining neutral even as she felt something cold settle in her stomach. She had heard variations of this speech before, during her training, during her previous assignments, from well-meaning supervisors and fellow soldiers who looked at her and saw only what was lacking rather than what might be possible. "I understand the requirements, Sergeant," she said when he finished. "I've completed all the prerequisite training and certifications." Rodriguez glanced at the papers again, and Maya could see him taking note of the various stamps and signatures that documented her qualifications. She had indeed completed every course, passed every test, met every standard that was required for the position she was seeking. On paper, she was exactly what they were looking for. In person, standing there in front of his desk, she looked like a strong wind might blow her away. "The training is one thing," he said finally. "The real world is something else entirely. This isn't about meeting minimum standards or checking boxes on a form. This is about whether you can do the job when it matters, when lives are on the line and there's no room for second chances." He stood up from behind his desk and walked around to where she was standing, his boots echoing in the small room. Up close, the difference in their size was even more pronounced. Rodriguez was not a large man by infantry standards, but he still had 6 inches and probably 60 pounds on Maya, and all of that weight was muscle earned through years of hard living in hard places. "I'm going to assign you to Lieutenant Murphy's squad," he said, and there was something in his voice that suggested this was not necessarily good news. "Murphy runs the new recruit orientation program. He'll evaluate your capabilities and make a recommendation about where you might best fit within the unit structure." Maya nodded, understanding that this was likely the best outcome she could have hoped for given the circumstances. She was being given a chance, even if it came wrapped in skepticism and hedged with expectations of failure. Murphy's squad meets at 060 for morning physical training, Rodriguez continued. After that, you'll begin a series of assessments designed to evaluate your readiness for mountain operations. I'll be honest with you, Chen. Most recruits who come through here wash out within the first 2 weeks. The mountains don't care about your feelings or your determination. They only care about what you can actually do. He returned to his desk and made a note on her paperwork before sliding it into a folder that joined the stack of other, administrative tasks demanding his attention. When he looked up at her again, his expression had softened slightly, though whether from sympathy or resignation was impossible to tell. The barracks assignment is in your packet, he said. Get some rest tonight. Tomorrow morning is going to come early, and it's going to be harder than anything you've done before. Maya collected her papers and headed for the door, but Rodriguez's voice stopped her before she could leave. Chen, he called out, and when she turned back to face him, she saw something in his expression that might have been respect, or at least acknowledgement. For what it's worth, I hope you prove me wrong. The barracks were located in a cluster of low buildings on the eastern edge of the base, positioned to catch the first light of dawn and the worst of the mountain winds that swept down from the peaks during the night. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Maya found her assigned room without difficulty. A sparse but functional space that contained 2 narrow beds, 2 metal lockers, and a small desk positioned beneath a window that looked out toward the training areas where she would spend the coming weeks, either proving herself or washing out in spectacular fashion. Her roommate had already claimed the bed nearest the window and had arranged her possessions with the kind of meticulous organization that spoke of military experience. Maya could tell from the gear visible in the open locker that she was sharing space with someone who had been at Ridgeway for a while, someone who had accumulated the specialized equipment and personal modifications that marked a soldier who had found her place within the unit structure. Maya unpacked her own belongings, which took considerably less time since she had traveled light and owned little beyond the essentials. Her few civilian clothes went into the bottom drawer of her locker, her uniforms were hung with precise spacing on the rod above, and her personal items, a small collection of books, a laptop computer, and a framed photograph of her family, were arranged on the shelf space she had been allocated. As she worked, she became aware of voices in the hallway outside her room, conversations that seemed to center on the new arrival and the questions her presence raised. She caught her name mentioned several times, always followed by speculation about her background, her qualifications, and her chances of surviving the selection process that awaited her. The tone of these discussions was not openly hostile, but neither was it particularly welcoming. There was a sense of professional curiosity mixed with the kind of skepticism that came from having seen too many confident recruits discover that confidence and capability were not the same thing. Later that evening, as Maya sat at the small desk reviewing the training materials she had been given, the door to her room opened and her roommate entered. She was a tall woman with the kind of lean, ropey build that came from years of carrying heavy loads across difficult terrain. Her dark hair was cropped short in a style that was both practical and regulation compliant, and her face bore the kind of deep tan that came from spending most of her waking hours outdoors, regardless of weather conditions. "You must be Chen," she said as she began the process of preparing for the next day's activities. "I'm Sergeant Williams. Been here about 18 months now." Maya turned from her desk and nodded a greeting. "Nice to meet you, Sergeant." Williams continued her preparations, laying out her uniform for the morning and checking her equipment with the automatic thoroughness of someone for whom such routines had become second nature. As she worked, she spoke without looking directly at Maya, her tone conversational, but carrying undertones that suggested she was delivering information that had been carefully considered beforehand. "Few things you should know about Murphy's squad," she said as she inspected her boots for wear and damage. "Lieutenant Murphy is fair, but he's also thorough. He's not going to cut you any slack because of your size, and he's not going to make things easier just because you're new. Everyone who comes through his program gets the same treatment, the same standards, the same expectations." She paused in her preparations and turned to face Maya directly, her expression serious but not unkind. "The physical training starts at 0600, but if you're smart, you'll be up by 0530 to get yourself ready. The PT uniform is shorts, t-shirt, and running shoes. But bring your cold weather gear because the temperature up here can change fast. After PT, there's breakfast, then equipment familiarization, then usually some kind of practical exercise depending on what Murphy has planned for the day." Williams returned to her preparations, but continued talking as she worked. "Most of the guys in the squad are good people, but they're also mountain infantry. They've been through things that would break most people, and they've earned the right to be proud of what they do. They're not going to be impressed by your paperwork or your test scores. They're going to want to see what you can do when the chips are down and the mountain is trying to kill you." She finished her preparations and sat down on her bed, facing Maya across the narrow space that separated them. "I'm not trying to scare you," she said, and her voice carried a note of genuine concern. "But I am trying to prepare you for what you're walking into tomorrow. This place has a way of finding every weakness you have and exploiting it until you either get stronger or break. Most people break." Maya absorbed this information without comment, understanding that Williams was offering her a kindness by sharing what she had learned through her own experience. The warning was delivered with the matter-of-fact tone of someone passing along technical information rather than trying to discourage or intimidate, and Maya appreciated both the content and the manner of its delivery. "What about you?" Maya asked. "How did you handle it when you first got here?" Williams smiled for the first time since entering the room, and the expression transformed her face from serious to almost friendly. "I was terrified," she admitted. "I came here from a logistics unit where the biggest challenge was making sure the supply trucks didn't get stuck in the mud. First day of mountain training, I threw up twice and nearly passed out from the altitude. Murphy had to carry my pack for the last 2 miles of the training march because I couldn't lift my arms above my shoulders." She leaned back against the wall, her expression thoughtful as she recalled those early days. "But I kept showing up, kept trying, kept pushing myself to do better. Eventually, something clicked. I found my rhythm, found my place in the team structure. Now I can't imagine doing anything else." Maya felt a small surge of hope at this story, evidence that it was possible to start from a position of weakness and grow into strength through persistence and effort. "Any advice?" she asked. Williams considered the question seriously before answering. "Don't try to be someone you're not," she said finally. "Don't try to prove that you're as strong as the biggest guy in the squad or as fast as the best runner. Focus on being the best version of yourself that you can be, and trust that if you're good enough, people will notice." She stood up and began the process of settling in for the night, but paused to add one final thought. "And remember that everyone here started somewhere. Even Murphy was new once. Even the guys who seemed like they were born wearing combat boots had to learn how to do this job. The difference between the people who make it and the people who don't isn't usually about natural ability. It's about who's willing to keep trying when everything hurts and nothing seems to be working." With that, Williams turned off the overhead light and settled into her bed, leaving Maya alone with her thoughts and the dim glow of the desk lamp. Outside the window, the mountains loomed against the star-filled sky like sleeping giants, their peaks disappearing into darkness that seemed to stretch forever upward. Somewhere out there, people were in trouble, people who would need rescuing, People whose lives might someday depend on whether Maya Chen could prove that size and strength were not the same thing. She returned to her study materials, reading about rope techniques and cold weather survival, about the physiology of altitude sickness and the psychology of panic in emergency situations. The information filled her head like water filling a container, each new fact adding to the weight of knowledge she would need to carry into the challenges that awaited her. But underneath the technical details and procedural guidelines, she felt something else building, something that had nothing to do with what she had learned from books or instructors. It was the quiet certainty that she belonged here, that despite what others might see when they looked at her, she had something to offer that could not be measured in pounds lifted or miles run. She had spent her entire life being underestimated, being told she was too small, too weak, too fragile for the things she wanted to do. Each time, she had found a way to prove those assessments wrong, not through dramatic gestures or angry confrontations, but through the simple act of persisting until her capabilities became undeniable. The alarm clock on her desk read 2,130 hours. Which meant she had less than 8 hours before her first day of evaluation would begin. Maya closed her books, turned off the desk lamp, and settled into her narrow bed, pulling the standard issue blanket up to her chin. The mattress was thin and the pillow barely deserved the name, but she had slept in worse conditions during her training, and exhaustion was beginning to override any concerns about comfort. As she lay there in the darkness, listening to Williams, breathing steadily in the bed across from hers, Maya thought about the conversation with Rodriguez and the warnings Williams had shared. Tomorrow would bring physical challenges designed to test her limits, followed by technical assessments that would evaluate her knowledge and judgment. There would be eyes watching her every move, looking for signs of weakness or failure, waiting to confirm their initial impressions about her suitability for the role she was seeking. But there would also be opportunities, chances to demonstrate that strength came in different forms and that the ability to carry a heavy pack was not the only qualification that mattered in a job that required intelligence, determination, and the kind of courage that had nothing to do with physical size. Maya had spent years preparing for this moment, not just through formal training, but through the countless small battles she had fought against the assumption that her limitations were more significant than her capabilities. She closed her eyes and tried to quiet her mind, knowing that tomorrow would demand everything she had to give and more besides. Somewhere in the darkness beyond her window, the mountains waited with their ancient indifference to human ambition and their absolute intolerance for weakness or error. But Maya Chen had not come this far to be stopped by geography or skepticism or the weight of other people's expectations. She had come here to prove something, not to the sergeants and lieutenants who would evaluate her performance, but to herself. She had come to find out whether the quiet voice inside her head that insisted she was stronger than she looked was telling the truth or simply offering comfort in the face of an impossible dream. Tomorrow morning, at 0600 hours, that process of discovery would begin in earnest. The wind picked up outside, rattling the windows and sending small debris skittering across the roof of the barracks. It was the sound of the mountains asserting their presence, reminding everyone within hearing distance that this was their domain and that humans existed here only by sufferance and constant vigilance. Maya listened to that wind and felt something inside her respond to its challenge, something that had been growing stronger with each obstacle she had overcome, and each person who had told her she could not do what she was determined to do. Alarm clock had not yet sounded when Maya's eyes opened in the pre-dawn darkness, her internal rhythm automatically adjusting to the demanding schedule that now governed her days. Around her, the barracks remained quiet except for the steady breathing of Williams in the adjacent bed and the distant sounds of the mountain wind that never seemed to completely die down even during the calmer hours before sunrise. Maya slipped from beneath her blanket with movements calculated to avoid disturbing her roommate, her bare feet touching the cold linoleum floor with barely a whisper of contact. The temperature inside the barracks was maintained at a level that could charitably be described as functional, but the mountain air that seeped through the building's aging insulation carried a bite that reminded everyone of the elevation and the season. Maya gathered her PT uniform from the chair where she had laid it out the night before, moving with the quiet efficiency she had learned during her years of shared living spaces and early morning routines. The shorts and t-shirt felt thin in her hands, inadequate protection against the cold that awaited her outside, but she had packed additional layers, as Williams had suggested. The communal bathroom at the end of the hallway was empty at this hour, its stark fluorescent lighting harsh against eyes still adjusting to wakefulness. Maya completed her morning routine quickly, splashing cold water on her face to drive away the last vestiges of sleep and pulling her hair back into the tight bun that regulation required. In the mirror above the sink, she saw a face that betrayed none of the nervousness that was building in her chest, a skill she had developed through years of facing situations where showing uncertainty could be interpreted as weakness. By the time she returned to her room, Williams was stirring in her bed, going through her own pre-dawn ritual with the automatic movements of someone for whom this routine had become as natural as breathing. She nodded a quiet greeting to Maya, but did not speak, understanding that the early morning hours were a time for preparation rather than conversation. Maya finished dressing, adding the cold weather layers that would protect her from the mountain air, and checked her equipment. One final time to ensure everything was properly secured and positioned. The walk to the assembly area took her across the central courtyard of the base, where the first hints of dawn were beginning to touch the eastern peaks with pale light that did nothing to warm the air, but everything to reveal the scale of the landscape that surrounded them. The mountains rose on all sides like the walls of a vast amphitheater, their slopes disappearing into morning, mist that obscured the higher elevations and created a sense of infinite vertical space extending beyond the limits of vision. Other soldiers were converging on the same destination, their movements purposeful and their conversations muted by the early hour and the weight of anticipation that always preceded a day of training in conditions that offered no margin for error. Maya recognized none of them, but she could tell from their bearing and their equipment that these were people who had moved beyond the basic requirements of military service into something more specialized and demanding. Lieutenant Murphy was waiting for them in the designated assembly area, a cleared space adjacent to the main training facilities where the ground had been worn smooth by countless boots and the repeated impact of bodies hitting the earth during various exercises. He was a compact man with the kind of weathered features that spoke of years spent outdoors in all weather conditions, and his eyes held the particular alertness that came from having spent extensive time in environments where a moment's inattention could prove fatal. As the members of his squad gathered in the pale morning light, Murphy studied each of them with the systematic attention of someone conducting an inventory of available resources. When his gaze fell on Maya, it lingered for several seconds longer than it had on the others, taking in her size relative to her equipment load and her general demeanor as she prepared for whatever challenges the day would bring. "Good morning," Murphy said, his voice carrying clearly across the assembly area despite being pitched at a conversational level. "For those of you who don't know, we have a new member joining our squad today. Chen, step forward." Maya moved out of the loose formation and positioned herself where Murphy indicated, feeling the weight of attention from the other squad members as they evaluated the newcomer who would be training alongside them. There were 8 of them in total, not counting Murphy himself, and Maya could see that they represented a range of experience levels from recent graduates of advanced training programs to seasoned veterans who carried themselves with the confidence that came from having successfully completed numerous real-world missions. Chen has just arrived from advanced infantry training and has requested assignment to search and rescue operations, Murphy continued, his tone neutral but carrying undertones. That suggested he was sharing information that would be relevant to how the day's activities would unfold. Today, we're going to begin her evaluation process with a series of exercises designed to assess her readiness for mountain operations. One of the squad members, a tall man with sergeant stripes on his uniform, raised his hand slightly to indicate a question. "Sir, what's the load requirement for today's exercise?" he asked, and Maya understood that this question was being asked as much for her benefit as for general information. "Standard mountain patrol load," Murphy replied. 45-pound pack plus personal equipment and emergency supplies. The route will take us up the North Face training trail to Checkpoint Alpha, then across the ridgeline to Checkpoint Bravo, then back down through the valley approach. Total distance approximately 12 miles with an elevation gain of 3,000 feet. Maya felt something cold settle in her stomach as she processed this information. A 45-pound pack represented nearly a third of her total body weight, and she would be carrying it over terrain that would challenge her balance, her endurance, and her ability to maintain the pace that the squad would set. She had trained with heavy loads before, but never in conditions like these. Never as part of a group evaluation where falling behind would be interpreted as evidence of fundamental unsuitability for the role she was seeking. Equipment check. "In 5 minutes, Murphy announced. "Then we move out. Chen, you'll be carrying position 4 in the formation, behind Martinez and in front of Johnson. Stay alert, maintain interval, and speak up immediately if you're having any difficulties that might affect the safety of the squad." The next few minutes were spent in the ritual of pre-mission preparation, each squad member going through a systematic check of their equipment, while Murphy moved among them to verify that everything was properly secured and positioned. When he reached Maya, his inspection was particularly thorough, testing the tension of her pack straps, checking the accessibility of her emergency equipment, and ensuring that her load was distributed in a way that would minimize the risk of injury or equipment failure during the march. "How does it feel?" he asked as she shouldered the full pack for the first time. The honest answer was that it felt heavier than anything she had ever carried for any significant distance, and that the weight was already beginning to affect her balance and her confidence in her ability to navigate difficult terrain. But Maya understood that honesty in this context would be interpreted as an admission of inadequacy, so she adjusted her stance to compensate for the load and gave him the answer he was looking for. "It feels manageable, sir," she said, and was relieved to hear that her voice remained steady despite the anxiety that was building in her chest. Murphy nodded and moved on to complete his inspection of the other squad members. But Maya caught him glancing back at her several times as though he was making mental notes about her posture and her general demeanor under load. She used the remaining preparation time to make small adjustments to her equipment, tightening straps here and repositioning items there, in an effort to find a configuration that would be sustainable over the distance they would be covering. When Murphy gave the signal to move out, the squad fell into formation with the practiced efficiency of a group that had worked together extensively. Maya found her assigned position in the column and focused on maintaining the proper interval, while adjusting to the rhythm that the lead elements were setting. The pace was not aggressive by the standards she had trained to during her preparation, but the combination of the load she was carrying and the thin air at this elevation made every step more demanding than she had anticipated. The trail began as a wide, well-maintained path that wound gradually upward through stands of pine trees that provided some protection from the wind, but also limited visibility of the terrain ahead. Maya found that she could manage this initial section without too much difficulty, though she was already beginning to feel the strain in her shoulders and lower back where the pack straps were concentrating the weight she was carrying. Around her, the other squad members moved with the easy confidence of people who had done this many times before, their breathing controlled and their pace steady despite the load they were carrying and the elevation they were gaining. As they climbed higher, the trail became more challenging, transitioning from the groomed path of the lower elevations to the rough, rocky terrain that characterized the mountain environment, where search and rescue operations actually took place. Loose stones shifted underfoot, requiring constant attention to balance and foot placement, while the increasing steepness of the ascent made every step a deliberate effort that demanded both physical strength and mental focus. Maya began to fall slightly behind the prescribed interval, not dramatically, but enough that Murphy, who was monitoring the formation from his position near the front, began glancing back more frequently to assess her progress. She made an effort to close the gap, pushing her pace until she was breathing hard and feeling the first signs of the muscle fatigue that would only worsen as the exercise continued. The weight on her back seemed to increase with every step, and she found herself making small adjustments to her posture in an effort to find a sustainable way to carry the load over the distance that remained. Martinez, the squad member directly in front of her, seemed to sense her struggle and began offering quiet words of encouragement when the trail conditions allowed for conversation. He was an experienced soldier with several years at Ridgeway, and Maya could tell that he understood the challenge she was facing because he had once faced it himself. "Breathe steady," he said during a brief pause while the lead elements checked their navigation. "Don't try to match everyone else's pace right away. Find your own rhythm and stick with it." Maya nodded her appreciation for the advice, but she was already beginning to understand that finding her own rhythm might not be sufficient. If that rhythm was significantly slower than what the squad required to complete their mission objectives, the gap between her capabilities and the standard that was expected was becoming more apparent with every mile they covered, and she could see in Murphy's increasingly frequent glances that her performance was being noted and evaluated. The checkpoint Alpha was located on an exposed ridge where the wind was strong enough to require careful attention to balance, particularly when carrying the kind of load that could shift a person's center of gravity in unpredictable ways. When the squad reached this point, Murphy called a brief halt to allow everyone to check their equipment and consume water and nutrition as needed. Maya was grateful for the break, not just because of the physical relief it provided, but because it gave her an opportunity to assess her condition and make adjustments that might help her perform better during the remainder of the exercise. Her water consumption was higher than she had planned, a sign that the combination of exertion and altitude was affecting her more than she had anticipated. Her shoulders and lower back were already showing signs of the kind of deep muscle fatigue that would make the descent particularly challenging, since going downhill with a heavy load required different muscle groups and placed different demands on balance and coordination. Murphy used the break to conduct what he called a tactical assessment, pointing out features of the surrounding terrain and asking squad members to identify potential hazards, navigation challenges, and sites that might be suitable for emergency operations. When he directed a question toward Maya, asking her to evaluate the wind conditions and their potential impact on helicopter operations, she found that her voice was slightly breathless despite her efforts to control her breathing. Her answer was technically correct, demonstrating that she understood the principles involved, but Murphy's expression suggested that he was noting the physical signs of strain that were becoming apparent in her speech and her posture. When the break ended and the squad prepared to continue toward Checkpoint Bravo, Maya could see that she was being watched more closely, not just by Murphy, but by several of the other squad members who had begun to realize that she might not be able to maintain the pace that the exercise required. The section between Checkpoint Alpha and Checkpoint Bravo was the most technically challenging part of the route, involving navigation across terrain that required careful foot placement and constant attention to balance while carrying a load that seemed to grow heavier with every step. Maya found herself falling further behind the prescribed interval, despite her efforts to maintain the pace that had been set. The gap between her position and the rest of the squad was becoming significant enough that it was affecting the cohesion of the formation and requiring adjustments from the other members. Johnson, the squad member behind her, was forced to slow his own pace to maintain proper interval, which in turn affected the spacing of the entire column. Maya could hear Murphy's voice over the radio, directing small adjustments to the formation, and asking for status reports that she understood were really assessments of her ability to continue with the exercise. When they reached Checkpoint Bravo, which was located on another exposed ridge with commanding views of the valley they would descend through on the return portion of the march, Maya was breathing hard and showing visible signs of fatigue that went beyond what would be expected from a soldier who was properly conditioned for this type of operation. Murphy called another halt, ostensibly to review the descent route, but actually to assess whether she was capable of completing the exercise safely. "Chen," he said, approaching her position where she had set down her pack and was attempting to stretch muscles that were already beginning to cramp. "How are you feeling?" The honest answer was that she was feeling overwhelmed by the physical demands of the exercise and uncertain about her ability to complete the remaining distance without compromising the safety or effectiveness of the squad. But Maya understood that admitting to difficulties at this point would likely result in her being removed from the exercise and possibly from consideration for the position she was seeking. "I'm managing, sir," she said, though her voice betrayed some of the strain she was experiencing. Murphy studied her for a moment, his expression unreadable, but his attention clearly focused on assessing her condition and her potential to continue. "The descent is going to be challenging," he said, and his tone carried a note of concern that was professional rather than personal. "Heavy pack, loose terrain, potential for injury if someone loses their footing. I need to know that everyone in this squad can complete the exercise without requiring assistance that would compromise our ability to respond to an emergency situation." Maya understood that she was being given an opportunity to withdraw from the exercise without officially failing, a face-saving measure that would allow her to attempt the evaluation again at a later date when she might be better prepared for the physical demands involved. But she also understood that accepting this offer would be interpreted as an admission that she was not ready for the challenges that the position would require, and that it would likely influence how future opportunities were presented to her. "I can complete the exercise, sir," she said, and as she spoke the words, she felt something inside her shift from uncertainty to determination. "I understand the risks, and I'm prepared to continue." Murphy held her gaze for several seconds, evaluating not just her words but the conviction behind them. Finally, he nodded and returned to his position at the front of the formation. 10 minutes, then we head down," he announced to the squad. "Stay alert, watch your footing, and maintain proper interval. The descent is where most accidents happen, so nobody takes any chances with their safety or anyone else's." Maya used the remaining break time to make adjustments to her pack and her equipment, tightening straps that had loosened during the ascent and repositioning items that had shifted in ways that were affecting her balance. She consumed more water and a small amount of nutrition, knowing that her energy reserves were already running lower than they should be for this stage of the exercise. The descent began with deceptive ease, the trail winding gently down from the exposed ridge through a series of switchbacks that allowed the squad to maintain a controlled pace while losing elevation gradually. Maya found that carrying the heavy pack downhill presented different challenges than the ascent had, requiring her to lean back against the weight that wanted to pull her forward, and to place each foot with deliberate care on terrain that could shift unexpectedly under the combined load of her body weight and equipment. For the first mile of the descent, she managed to maintain the proper interval and keep pace with the rest of the squad, though she could feel the strain building in her quadriceps and the stabilizing muscles around her knees as they absorbed the repeated impact of each downward step. The pack straps had begun to dig into her shoulders in a way that was becoming increasingly uncomfortable, and she found herself making small adjustments to her posture in an effort to redistribute the weight more evenly across her frame. Martinez, continued to offer quiet encouragement when the terrain allowed for conversation, sharing technical advice about foot placement and weight distribution that helped Maya navigate the more challenging sections of the trail. She could tell that he was drawing on his own experience as a new squad member, remembering the difficulties he had faced during his own evaluation period and the small adjustments that had made the difference between success and failure. The terrain became more challenging as they descended into the valley, transitioning from the well-defined switchbacks of the upper elevations to the rough, rocky surface that characterized the approach routes used during actual rescue operations. Loose stones and patches of scree required constant attention to balance, while fallen logs and other natural obstacles demanded careful navigation to avoid catching equipment or losing footing. Maya began to notice that her concentration was being affected by the fatigue that was building in her legs and the persistent discomfort from the pack straps that were now causing genuine pain across her shoulders and upper back. She found herself focusing more attention on simply maintaining her balance and less on the tactical aspects of the exercise that Murphy had been emphasizing throughout the day. When he called out questions about terrain assessment or emergency procedures, her responses came more slowly and with less precision than they had during the earlier portions of the march. The squad reached a particularly challenging section where the trail descended steeply through a boulder field that required careful route finding and precise foot placement to navigate safely. Murphy called a brief halt to assess the conditions and briefed the squad on the specific hazards they would need to avoid during this portion of the descent. As he spoke, Maya could see him glancing in her direction more frequently, clearly monitoring her condition and evaluating whether she was maintaining the level of alertness that the terrain demanded. When they resumed movement, Maya found that the technical nature of the descent was requiring more energy than she had anticipated. Each step had to be carefully planned and executed, with constant attention to the stability of the surface beneath her feet and the position of her center of gravity relative to the load she was carrying. The mental effort of maintaining this level of concentration was adding to the physical fatigue she was already experiencing, creating a cumulative effect that was beginning to affect her performance in measurable ways. She stumbled slightly on a loose rock, catching herself before falling, but in the process, creating a brief disruption in the formation that required adjustments from the other squad members. Murphy immediately called out a reminder about the importance of maintaining concentration and proper technique, but Maya could hear in his voice that this incident was being noted as evidence of declining performance under stress. Johnson, who was maintaining position behind her, moved closer and offered to assist with her pack if she was experiencing difficulties. Maya appreciated the gesture, but understood that accepting help would be interpreted as an admission that she could not meet the physical demands of the position she was seeking. She declined the offer and made an effort to regain the proper interval, though she could feel that the margin for error was becoming increasingly narrow. The boulder field gave way to a section of trail that wound through dense forest where the reduced visibility and uneven footing created different challenges for the squad to navigate. Here, the danger was less about dramatic falls and more about the accumulated stress of maintaining alertness and proper technique over an extended period while carrying a load that was testing the limits of her physical capabilities. Maya found that her water consumption continued to exceed her planned rate, a sign that the combination of exertion, altitude, and stress was affecting her more significantly than she had anticipated. She was also beginning to experience the first signs of what might be altitude-related symptoms, including a mild headache and a feeling of lightheadedness that made concentration more difficult than it should have been at this stage of the exercise. When the squad paused for a brief navigation check, Maya used the opportunity to assess her condition more carefully. Her heart rate was elevated beyond what would be expected for this level of exertion, and she was showing signs of dehydration. Despite her efforts to maintain proper fluid intake, The pack seemed to have grown heavier during the descent, though she knew this was a subjective impression caused by the cumulative fatigue that was affecting her entire body. Murphy approached her during the break, his expression showing the kind of professional concern that indicated he was weighing the risks of allowing her to continue against the potential consequences of removing her from the exercise. "Chen, I need an honest assessment of your condition," he said, his voice pitched low enough that the conversation would not be overheard by the other squad members. "We still have approximately 4 miles to cover, including some technical terrain. That's going to require your full attention and physical capability." Maya understood that this was another opportunity to withdraw from the exercise without officially failing, but she also knew that her response would be interpreted as an indication of her judgment, under stress as much as her physical condition. She took a moment to honestly evaluate how she was feeling, acknowledging the fatigue and discomfort while also assessing her ability to continue safely. "I'm experiencing some fatigue, sir, but I believe I can complete the exercise without compromising the safety of the squad," she said, choosing her words carefully to convey both honesty about her condition and confidence in her ability to continue. Murphy studied her for several seconds, clearly weighing multiple factors in his decision about how to proceed. Maya could see that he was considering not just her current condition but also her potential to improve with experience and the message that removing her from the exercise would send about the standards and expectations of the unit. "The next section includes a water crossing that's going to test your balance and coordination while carrying full load," he said finally. "After that, we have a steep descent through loose terrain where a mistake could result in serious injury. I need to know that you're going to be fully alert and capable throughout that portion of the route." Maya nodded her understanding, recognizing that Murphy was outlining the specific challenges that remained while also giving her a final opportunity to reconsider her decision to continue. She appreciated both his concern for her safety and his willingness to allow her to make the choice about whether to proceed, rather than simply removing her from the exercise based on his observations of her performance. "I understand the risk, sir, and I'm prepared to continue," she said, and as she spoke, she felt the same shift from uncertainty to determination that had carried her through previous challenges in her military career. The water crossing that Murphy had mentioned proved to be a significant test of both technical skill and physical capability. The stream was swollen with snowmelt from the higher elevations, running fast and cold over a bed of smooth stones that provided uncertain footing even without the complication of carrying a heavy pack. The squad had to cross one at a time, using a combination of careful route selection and mutual support to ensure that everyone made it safely to the far side. Maya watched as the other squad members navigated the crossing, noting the techniques they used and the specific challenges posed by the current and the slippery rocks. When her turn came, she approached the water with careful deliberation, testing each step before committing her full weight and using her trekking poles for additional stability in the current. Halfway across, she felt her foot slip on a submerged rock, and for a moment, the combined weight of her body and pack threatened to pull her down into the rushing water. She recovered her balance through a combination of quick reflexes and sheer determination, but the incident left her heart racing and her confidence shaken. The other squad members had noticed the near fall, and she could see in their expressions that they were beginning to question whether she could complete the remaining distance without requiring assistance. The steep descent that followed the water crossing was exactly as challenging as Murphy had indicated, requiring constant attention to foot placement and balance while navigating loose terrain that shifted underfoot with every step. Maya found that the near fall at the stream crossing had affected her confidence more than she had initially realized, making her more cautious and tentative in her movements at a time when the terrain demanded decisive action and precise technique. She began to fall behind the prescribed interval again, despite her efforts to maintain the pace that the squad required. The gap was becoming significant enough that Murphy was forced to adjust the formation, calling frequent halts to allow her to close the distance and ensure that the squad remained cohesive. Maya could see that these adjustments were affecting the efficiency of the entire group, and that her performance was becoming a limiting factor in their ability to complete the exercise according to the planned timeline. Johnson continued to offer assistance, move in closer to provide support if she should stumble in making quiet suggestions about technique that might help her navigate the more challenging sections. Maya appreciated his efforts but understood that the level of attention she was requiring was itself evidence that she was not meeting the standard that would be expected during an actual rescue operation. The final 2 miles of the descent took them through terrain that was less technically demanding, but more physically exhausting. A gradual downhill grade that placed constant stress on the muscles of her legs and core, while offering no opportunity for the brief recovery that the steeper sections had provided through their requirement for careful, deliberate movement. Maya found that this sustained effort was the most challenging part of the entire exercise, testing her endurance and mental toughness in ways that the more dramatic obstacles had not. Her pack seemed to grow heavier with every step, and she found herself making frequent adjustments to the straps and positioning in an effort to find a configuration that would be sustainable for the remaining distance. The pain in her shoulders had progressed from discomfort to a constant ache that affected her posture and her ability to maintain proper form, while the fatigue in her legs was beginning to affect her balance and coordination in subtle but measurable ways. When the squad finally reached the base camp where the exercise would conclude, Maya was showing visible signs of exhaustion that went beyond what would be expected from a soldier who was properly conditioned for this type of operation. Her breathing was labored, her movements were less precise than they had been at the beginning of the day, and she was clearly struggling with the final steps required to complete the march according to the established standards. Murphy called the squad to a halt in the designated assembly area and directed them to conduct post-exercise equipment checks while he reviewed their performance and prepared his assessment of the day's activities. Maya set down her pack with a sense of relief that was both physical and emotional, grateful to have completed the exercise, but uncertain about how her performance would be evaluated and what it would mean for her future opportunities within the unit. As she went through the routine of checking her equipment and accounting for all items that had been issued for the exercise, Maya could feel the eyes of the other squad members on her, evaluating her condition and drawing their own conclusions about her suitability for the demanding role she was seeking. Some of their expressions showed sympathy for the challenge she had faced, while others reflected the kind of professional skepticism that came from having seen too many candidates attempt tasks for which they were not adequately prepared. Murphy approached her as she completed her equipment check, his expression unreadable, but his attention clearly focused on conducting a thorough assessment of her performance and her condition following the exercise. "How do you feel about your performance today?" he asked, and Maya understood that this question was designed to evaluate her self-awareness and judgment as much as her physical capabilities. Maya considered her response carefully, recognizing that honesty about her struggles would be important, but that she also needed to demonstrate that she understood the lessons to be learned from the experience and remained committed to meeting the standards that the position required. "I completed the exercise, sir, but I recognize that my performance was not at the level that would be expected during an actual rescue operation," she said. "I need to improve my conditioning and my load-carrying capability before I would be ready to serve effectively as part of a search and rescue team." Murphy nodded, and Maya could see that her honest self-assessment had been noted positively, even though her physical performance had fallen short of the standard that was required. The ability to accurately assess your own capabilities and limitations is an important qualification for this type of work, he said. Mountain rescue operations leave no room for self-deception or wishful thinking about what you can and cannot do. He paused for a moment, studying her with the same systematic attention he had shown at the beginning of the day. But now his evaluation was informed by 12 miles of observation under actual operating conditions. Your technical knowledge is solid, and you demonstrated good judgment throughout the exercise, he continued. Your determination and mental toughness are clearly adequate for the demands of the job. The question is whether you can develop the physical capabilities that will allow you to perform effectively as part of a team operating in extreme conditions. Maya understood that Murphy was outlining both the positive aspects of her performance and the areas where improvement would be necessary before she could be considered ready for operational assignments. She appreciated his balanced assessment and his willingness to identify specific areas for development rather than simply declaring her unsuitable for the position. "What would you recommend as next steps, sir?" she asked, recognizing that his experience and expertise would be valuable in developing a plan for addressing the deficiencies that had been identified during the exercise. Murphy considered her question for several moments, clearly weighing multiple factors in his recommendation about how she should proceed. "I'm going to recommend that you be assigned to a conditioning program, specifically designed to prepare personnel for mountain operations," he said finally. "This will include advanced physical training, additional technical instruction, and a series of progressive exercises that will allow you to build the capabilities you need while gaining experience with the equipment and procedures we use." Maya felt a surge of relief at this response, understanding that Murphy was recommending additional training rather than dismissal from consideration for the position. This meant that her performance, while not meeting current standards, had demonstrated enough potential to justify the investment of time and resources required to bring her capabilities up to the level that would be required. The conditioning program typically takes 8 to 12 weeks, depending on the individual's starting point and rate of progress, Murphy continued. At the end of that period, you would repeat today's evaluation along with additional assessments, designed to test your readiness for operational assignments. He handed her a folder containing information about the conditioning program, including schedules, requirements, and performance standards that would need to be met at various stages of the training progression. "This is not a guarantee that you will ultimately be selected for search and rescue operations," he said, and his tone carried the matter-of-fact directness that Maya had come to associate with military communications about serious subjects. "But it is an opportunity to develop the capabilities that will give you the best possible chance of success when you attempt the evaluation again." Maya accepted the folder and thanked Murphy for his assessment and his recommendations, understanding that she had been given something valuable in the form of specific, actionable guidance about how to proceed. The other squad members had completed their post-exercise procedures and were beginning to disperse, some heading to the mess hall for a meal that Maya realized she had more than earned, others returning to their barracks to rest and recover from the day's exertions. As Maya gathered her equipment and prepared to return to her own quarters, she reflected on the lessons learned during her first formal evaluation at Camp Ridgeway. She had completed the exercise, which was itself an achievement given the physical demands involved and the challenging conditions under which it had been conducted. But she had also learned that completion was not the same as success, and that meeting minimum standards was not sufficient for the kind of work she wanted to do. The conditioning program that Murphy had recommended represented both an opportunity and a challenge, a chance to develop the capabilities she needed, but also a test of her commitment to pursuing a goal that would require months of additional effort and sacrifice. Maya understood that not everyone who entered such a program would complete it successfully, and that even those who did complete it would not necessarily be selected for operational assignments. But as she walked back across the base in the fading afternoon light, Maya felt the same quiet determination that had carried her through previous challenges in her military career. She had been underestimated before, had been told that she was too small or too weak for various roles and assignments, And each time she had found a way to prove that assessment wrong through persistence, preparation, and an unwillingness to accept limitations that others tried to impose on her capabilities. The mountains around Camp Ridgeway rose into the darkening sky like sentinels, their peaks disappearing into clouds that promised weather changes in the days ahead. Somewhere among those peaks, people would need rescuing, people whose lives would depend on the skills and capabilities of the search and rescue teams that operated from this base. Maya looked up at those mountains and felt something inside her respond to their challenge, a recognition that the work she wanted to do was important, enough to justify whatever effort would be required to earn the right to do it. That evening, as she sat in her barracks reviewing the materials Murphy had given her about the conditioning program, Maya began to develop a plan for the weeks ahead. The program was demanding but systematic, designed to build capabilities progressively, while providing multiple opportunities to assess progress and make adjustments as needed. It would require early mornings and late evenings, additional physical training beyond the standard requirements, and a level of focus and commitment that would leave little time for anything else. Williams returned to their shared room as Maya was studying the training schedules, and she could see immediately that the day's exercise had been challenging but not discouraging. Maya's equipment was arranged with the same meticulous care it had shown the night before. Her uniform was already laid out for the following day, and her expression showed the kind of determined focus that indicated she was preparing for a long campaign rather than recovering from a single difficult day. "How did it go?" Williams asked as she began her own evening routine. Maya looked up from her materials and considered how to summarize an experience that had been both humbling and educational, challenging and encouraging in different ways. "I completed the exercise, but I have a lot of work to do before I'll be ready for operational assignments," she said, and Williams could hear in her voice that this assessment was based on honest self-evaluation rather than false modesty or discouragement. Williams nodded, understanding that Maya had been given the kind of feedback that was both difficult to hear and valuable to receive, the sort of honest assessment that made improvement possible by identifying specific areas where development was needed. "Murphy's conditioning program?" she asked, and when Maya nodded, Williams smiled slightly. "That's actually good news. He doesn't recommend people for additional training unless he thinks they have real potential to succeed. Most people who don't meet the standard on their first evaluation just get reassigned to other duties." This information provided Maya with additional context for understanding Murphy's recommendations, suggesting that her performance had demonstrated enough promise to justify the investment of time and resources that the conditioning program would require. She felt a renewed sense of optimism about her prospects for eventually earning a place on a search and rescue team, tempered by a realistic understanding of the work that would be required to get there. "Any advice for someone starting the conditioning program?" Maya asked, recognizing that Williams might have insights that would be helpful during the challenging weeks ahead. Williams considered the question as she prepared for sleep, drawing on her own experience and her observations of others who had gone through similar training progressions. "The physical demands are significant, but they're manageable if you approach them systematically and don't try to do too much too quickly," she said. "The mental challenges are actually harder, dealing with the frustration when progress seems slow, maintaining motivation when the training becomes repetitive, keeping perspective when setbacks occur." She turned off the overhead light, but continued talking in the darkness, her voice carrying the authority of someone who had successfully navigated similar challenges. "Remember that everyone who's currently serving on a search and rescue team started somewhere, and most of them struggled with aspects of the training, just like you're going to struggle. The difference between the people who make it and the people who don't isn't usually about natural ability or physical gifts. It's about who's willing to keep working when the progress is slow and the results aren't immediately obvious." Maya absorbed this advice, understanding that Williams was sharing hard-won wisdom about the psychological aspects of demanding training programs that often received less attention than the physical requirements, but were equally important for determining success or failure. As she settled into her narrow bed, Maya thought about the day's events and the path that lay ahead of her. The 12-mile exercise had been both a test and a learning experience, providing her with specific information about her current capabilities and clear guidance about what would need to be improved before she could be considered ready for operational assignments. The conditioning program would begin the following Monday, giving her the weekend to rest, recover, and prepare both physically and mentally for the increased demands that would characterize the next phase of her training. Maya understood that the weeks ahead would test her commitment and her resilience in ways that the single-day evaluation had not, requiring sustained effort over an extended period rather than the intense but brief challenge she had just completed. But as she closed her eyes and listened to the mountain wind that never seemed to completely die down even during the quieter nighttime hours, Maya felt a sense of anticipation rather than anxiety about what was to come. She had been given an opportunity to prove herself, not through a single dramatic gesture, but through the steady accumulation of improved capabilities demonstrated over time. It was exactly the kind of challenge she had been preparing for throughout her military career, and she was ready to begin. The alarm clock on her desk read 2,200 hours, indicating that she had less than 8 hours before another day of training would begin. But this time, Maya fell asleep quickly, her body exhausted from the day's exertions, but her mind clear about the path forward and confident in her ability to meet whatever challenges the conditioning program would present. Tomorrow would bring new opportunities to demonstrate her commitment and begin the process of building the capabilities that would eventually allow her to serve as part of a search and rescue team operating in some of the most demanding environments on Earth. The conditioning program began at 0430 hours on a Monday morning when the mountain air carried the bite of approaching winter and the peaks surrounding Camp Ridgeway were shrouded in clouds that promised snow before the week was finished. Maya stood in the pre-dawn darkness outside the specialized training facility, her breath visible in small puffs as she waited with 7 other candidates who had been selected for the intensive 12-week program designed to prepare personnel for mountain rescue operations. The other candidates represented a diverse mix of military backgrounds and experience levels, from recent graduates of advanced infantry training to seasoned soldiers seeking to transition into specialized roles. What they shared was a common recognition that their current capabilities were insufficient for the demands of search and rescue work and a willingness to commit the time and effort required to bridge that gap through systematic preparation and progressive skill development. Master Sergeant Elena Vasquez emerged from the training facility at precisely 0430, her appearance and bearing immediately establishing her as someone who had earned the right to evaluate others through personal experience in the most demanding operational environments. She was a compact woman with the kind of lean, efficient build that spoke of years spent carrying heavy loads across difficult terrain, and her weathered features bore the marks of extended exposure to mountain weather and high-altitude conditions. "Good morning," she said, her voice carrying clearly across the assembly area, despite the early hour and the wind that swept down from the higher elevations. "For the next 12 weeks, I will be responsible for your training, your evaluation, and ultimately for determining whether you are ready to serve as operational members of a search and rescue team." She paused to study each candidate individually, her gaze systematic and professional as she conducted an initial assessment of the group she would be working with over the coming months. "This program has a completion rate of approximately 60%, she continued, and her tone carried no particular emphasis or emotion as she shared the statistic. "Those who do not complete the program are typically reassigned to other duties within the base structure. Those who do complete it successfully are eligible for consideration for operational assignments. Though completion of training does not guarantee selection for active duty, Maya absorbed this information along with the other candidates, understanding that the program represented both an opportunity and a significant challenge that would test her capabilities and commitment over an extended period. The 40% failure rate suggested that the training would be demanding enough to eliminate candidates who were not fully prepared for the physical and mental demands of mountain rescue work. Vasquez led the group into the training facility, which had been specifically designed to support the kind of specialized preparation that search and rescue personnel required. The main floor contained an extensive collection of climbing equipment, rope systems, and technical gear arranged in organized displays that allowed for systematic instruction and hands-on practice. Adjacent rooms housed fitness equipment calibrated for high-altitude training, classroom space for technical instruction, and storage areas for the personal equipment that each candidate would be issued for use throughout the program. The first week of training focused primarily on assessment and baseline establishment, with each candidate undergoing a comprehensive evaluation of their current physical capabilities, technical knowledge, and psychological readiness for the challenges ahead. Maya found herself being tested in areas ranging from basic fitness metrics to complex problem-solving scenarios designed to simulate the kind of decision-making required during actual rescue operations. The physical assessments were particularly revealing, providing detailed information about her strengths and limitations that would be used to develop individualized training programs for each candidate. Maya's cardiovascular fitness was adequate for the altitude and activity levels required, but her load-carrying capacity and upper body strength were identified as areas requiring significant improvement before she would be ready for operational assignments. Vasquez approached these assessments with the same systematic thoroughness she brought to all aspects of the training program, collecting data rather than making judgments and focusing on identifying specific areas where development would be most beneficial. When she reviewed Maya's results, her comments were focused on actionable recommendations rather than general observations about suitability or potential. "Your endurance base is solid, which gives us a good foundation to build on," she said, as they reviewed the assessment data together. "Your technical knowledge is comprehensive, and your decision-making under stress appears sound. The primary areas for development are going to be load-carrying capacity and the specific strength requirements for rope work and technical rescue operations." Maya appreciated the matter-of-fact tone of this feedback, which focused on measurable capabilities that could be improved through targeted training rather than subjective assessments of her potential or suitability for the role. Vasquez handed her a training plan that had been customized based on her assessment results, outlining specific exercises, progressions, and performance targets that would guide her development over the coming weeks. The daily routine that emerged during the second week was demanding but manageable, beginning with physical training at 0500 and continuing through technical instruction, practical exercises, and individual skill development until 1800 hours each day. Maya found that the systematic approach to capability building was more effective than the random challenges she had faced during her initial evaluation, allowing her to make measurable progress while building confidence in her ability to meet the program's requirements. The physical training component emphasized functional strength and endurance rather than general fitness, with exercises specifically designed to develop the capabilities required for mountain rescue operations. Maya spent hours each day working with weighted packs, practicing rope techniques, and developing the kind of specialized conditioning that would allow her to perform effectively in operational environments. Vasquez supervised these sessions with careful attention to technique and safety, making frequent adjustments to ensure that each candidate was developing proper form and building strength in ways that would transfer effectively to real-world applications. Maya appreciated her patient approach to instruction, which focused on progressive skill development rather than testing limits or pushing candidates beyond their current capabilities. The technical instruction covered a broad range of subjects, including weather assessment, navigation in challenging conditions, first aid and emergency medical procedures, and the complex logistics of coordinating rescue operations in remote locations. Maya found that her previous military training provided a solid foundation for much of this material, though the mountain-specific applications required careful study and practice to master effectively. During the 4th week of training, Maya began to notice measurable improvements in her physical capabilities. The weighted pack exercises that had been exhausting initially were becoming more manageable, and she was able to maintain proper form and technique for longer periods without experiencing the kind of fatigue that had characterized her early training sessions. Vasquez noted these improvements during their weekly progress reviews, updating Maya's training plan to reflect her advancing capabilities and introducing more challenging exercises designed to continue pushing her development. The systematic approach to progression was both encouraging and demanding, providing clear evidence of improvement while maintaining the pressure necessary to drive continued growth. The other candidates in the program were making their own progress at different rates and in different areas, creating a dynamic training environment where everyone was working towards similar goals but following individualized paths based on their specific strengths and limitations. Maya developed working relationships with several of her fellow candidates, sharing techniques and providing mutual support during the more challenging aspects of the training. Private Marcus Webb had arrived at the program from an artillery unit where his experience with heavy equipment and mechanical systems proved valuable during technical rescue exercises. Corporal Sarah Kim brought extensive medical training that benefited the entire group during first aid instruction and emergency response scenarios. Sergeant David Torres contributed leadership experience and tactical expertise that enhanced the group's performance during complex multi-person exercises. Maya found that her own contributions to the group dynamic centered around careful observation and systematic problem-solving, skills that proved valuable during navigation exercises and equipment troubleshooting scenarios. She began to understand that effective search and rescue operations required a diverse mix of capabilities, and that her particular strengths could complement those of her teammates rather than simply duplicating what others brought to the team. The 6th week of the program introduced more challenging practical exercises that simulated actual rescue scenarios under controlled conditions. Maya participated in exercises involving rope rescues from vertical terrain, evacuation of injured personnel across difficult ground, and coordination of multi-team operations in conditions designed to test communication and decision-making under stress. These exercises provided opportunities to apply the technical skills and physical capabilities that had been developed during the earlier weeks of training, while also introducing the psychological challenges associated with high-stakes decision-making in dangerous environments. Maya found that she performed well during these scenarios, demonstrating both the competence and composure that would be required during actual rescue operations. Vasquez conducted detailed debriefings following each exercise, analyzing both individual and group performance while identifying areas for continued improvement. Maya appreciated these sessions, which provided specific feedback about her developing capabilities, while also exposing her to the kind of analytical thinking that characterized effective rescue operations. By the 8th week of the program, Maya was consistently meeting the performance standards that had been established for her training progression, and Vasquez began introducing advanced exercises designed to test her readiness for operational assignments. These included extended duration exercises that combined multiple technical challenges, leadership scenarios that required her to coordinate team activities, and problem-solving exercises that simulated the kind of complex decision-making required during actual emergencies. Maya approached these advanced exercises with growing confidence in her abilities, understanding that she had developed the physical capabilities and technical skills necessary to perform effectively in demanding operational environments. The systematic progression of the training program had allowed her to build competence gradually while maintaining the kind of safety margins that were essential for both learning and actual rescue work. The weather during the 9th week brought the first significant snowfall of the season, transforming the training environment and introducing additional challenges that more closely simulated the conditions under which actual rescue operations were often conducted. Maya found that the cold weather and reduced visibility required adjustments to techniques and procedures that had been mastered under more favorable conditions, but that the fundamental capabilities developed during the program translated effectively to these more demanding circumstances. Vasquez used the changing weather conditions as an opportunity to introduce winter-specific rescue techniques and to test the candidates' ability to adapt their training to real-world conditions that could change rapidly and unpredictably. Maya performed well during these exercises, demonstrating both technical competence and the kind of adaptability that would be essential for effective performance in operational environments. During the 10th week, Vasquez announced that the final evaluation would take place during the following week, consisting of a comprehensive exercise that would test all aspects of the training that had been completed over the previous months. The exercise would simulate an actual rescue scenario requiring the integration of technical skills, physical capabilities, and decision-making under stress and conditions, designed to challenge even experienced rescue personnel. Maya spent the time leading up to the final evaluation reviewing her training materials and practicing the techniques that would be tested. But she also focused on mental preparation for an exercise that would determine whether she would be recommended for operational assignments. She understood that this evaluation would be more demanding than anything she had faced during the training program, requiring her to demonstrate not just competence but the kind of superior performance that would justify confidence in her ability to contribute effectively to actual rescue operations. The final evaluation began before dawn on a Thursday morning when heavy snow was falling and visibility was limited to less than 50 meters in most areas around the base. Maya and the other candidates assembled in full winter gear, carrying the kind of specialized equipment that would be required for technical rescue operations in severe weather conditions. Vasquez briefed them on a scenario involving multiple injured climbers, stranded on a remote section of the mountain during deteriorating weather conditions that were preventing helicopter evacuation. The exercise would require the candidates to navigate to the incident site using map and compass in limited visibility, assess the medical condition of the simulated casualties, establish secure anchor points for rope rescue operations, and evacuate the injured personnel to a location where they could be transported to medical facilities. The scenario was designed to test every aspect of their training, while also requiring the kind of teamwork and communication that characterized effective rescue operations. Maya found herself assigned as the medical specialist for her team, responsible for assessing casualties and making treatment decisions while also participating in the technical aspects of the rescue operation. This assignment played to her strengths in systematic problem-solving and careful observation, while also requiring her to demonstrate the physical capabilities that had been developed through months of conditioning and training. The navigation to the incident site proved challenging due to the weather conditions and the difficult terrain that had to be traversed while carrying full rescue equipment. Maya maintained her position in the team formation while contributing to route-finding decisions and equipment management, demonstrating both individual competence and the ability to function effectively as part of a coordinated team effort. When they reached the simulated incident site, Maya immediately began assessing the condition of the casualties, while other team members established anchor points and prepared rope systems for the evacuation. Her medical training allowed her to quickly identify the most seriously injured casualty and prioritize treatment decisions based on the resources available and the evacuation timeline that had been established. The technical rescue operation required precise coordination between team members as they established rope systems capable of safely evacuating injured personnel down steep terrain in deteriorating weather conditions. Maya participated in every aspect of this operation, from rigging anchor points to managing casualty care during the evacuation process, demonstrating both technical competence and the physical stamina required for extended operations in demanding conditions. The weather continued to deteriorate throughout the exercise, adding realistic complications that required adaptive decision-making and flexible execution of rescue procedures. Maya found that the systematic training she had received prepared her well for these challenges, allowing her to maintain effective performance even as conditions became increasingly difficult and time pressure mounted. The evacuation of the most seriously injured casualty required Maya to serve as the primary attendant during a complex rope rescue operation that took place in near whiteout conditions. She had to monitor the casualty's medical condition while also managing her own safety and contributing to the technical aspects of the rope work, demonstrating the kind of multitasking capability that was essential for effective rescue operations. When the exercise concluded after nearly 8 hours of continuous operation in severe weather conditions, Maya was exhausted but confident that she had demonstrated the capabilities required for operational assignments. Vasquez conducted individual debriefings with each candidate, reviewing their performance and providing feedback about their readiness for assignment to active rescue teams. During Maya's day briefing, Vasquez reviewed her performance systematically, noting both strengths and areas where continued development would be beneficial. Her technical skills were assessed as fully adequate for operational requirements. Her physical conditioning had reached the level necessary for demanding rescue scenarios, and her decision-making under stress had been consistently sound throughout the exercise. "Your performance during the conditioning program has been exemplary," Vasquez said as she completed her assessment. "You have demonstrated significant improvement in all areas that were identified as needing development, and your performance during the final evaluation was at the level I would expect from an experienced rescue specialist." Maya felt a surge of satisfaction at this feedback, understanding that Vasquez was recommending her for assignment to an operational rescue team based on her demonstrated capabilities rather than potential or promise. The months of systematic training and progressive skill development had achieved their intended purpose, transforming her from a candidate with significant limitations into someone capable of contributing effectively to actual rescue operations. 3 days after the final evaluation, Maya received notification that she had been assigned to Alpha Team, one of 3 operational search and rescue units based at Camp Ridgeway. The team was led by Captain Jennifer Morrison, a veteran rescue specialist with extensive experience in high-altitude operations, and included 4 other team members with complementary skills and capabilities that allowed the unit to respond effectively to a wide range of emergency scenarios. Maya reported to Alpha Team on a Monday morning in late November, when the mountains around Camp Ridgeway were already showing the effects of early winter weather and rescue operations were becoming increasingly challenging due to reduced daylight hours and rapidly changing conditions. Captain Morrison conducted a brief orientation that introduced Maya to the team's operating procedures, equipment standards, and the rotation schedule that determined when each team would be on standby for emergency response. The other team members welcomed Maya with the kind of professional courtesy that indicated they had reviewed her training records and were prepared to evaluate her contributions based on performance rather than preconceptions about her capabilities. Staff Sergeant Michael Chen had extensive experience with technical rope rescues. Sergeant Lisa Rodriguez specialized in wilderness medicine and evacuation procedures. Corporal James Patterson brought expertise in winter operations and cold weather survival, and Specialist Amanda Foster contributed advanced communication and coordination skills that were essential for complex multi-agency operations. Maya's first assignment was to serve as backup medical specialist while also contributing to the technical aspects of rescue operations as needed. This role allowed her to continue developing her skills while making meaningful contributions to the team's capabilities. And Captain Morrison made it clear that advancement to primary specialist positions would be based on demonstrated competence rather than seniority or tenure with the unit. For the first 3 weeks of her assignment, Maya participated in training exercises and equipment maintenance activities while waiting for her first actual rescue mission. She used this time to become familiar with the team's procedures and equipment while also building working relationships with her new teammates based on mutual respect and shared commitment to the mission they were trained to perform. The call came at 0347 hours on a Tuesday morning in December, when a winter storm was already beginning to affect the higher elevations and weather conditions were deteriorating rapidly throughout the region. Captain Morrison received notification that 3 experienced climbers had failed to return from a technical route on the north face of Mount Patterson, and that their emergency beacon had activated during the night, indicating that at least one member of the party was injured and unable to continue. The location of the beacon signal placed the climbers approximately 8,000 feet above sea level in terrain that was both technically challenging and extremely dangerous during winter conditions. The approaching storm was expected to bring heavy snow and high winds that would make helicopter evacuation impossible and ground rescue operations extremely hazardous for both the stranded climbers and any rescue teams attempting to reach them. Captain Morrison assembled Alpha Team in the Operations Center and briefed them on the scenario they would be facing, emphasizing both the urgency of the situation and the significant risks that would be involved in attempting a rescue under these conditions. The weather window for initiating the operation was limited, and any delay would likely result in conditions becoming too dangerous for rescue teams to operate effectively. Maya listened to the briefing with growing awareness that this would be her first actual rescue mission, the real-world test of the capabilities she had developed through months of training and preparation. She felt nervous but not overwhelmed, understanding that she had been systematically prepared for exactly this kind of scenario and that her teammates were experienced professionals who would support her performance while expecting her to contribute effectively to the mission. The approach to the incident site required a grueling 4-hour climb through increasingly difficult terrain as elevation was gained and weather conditions deteriorated. Maya carried her assigned portion of the team's equipment while maintaining the pace that Captain Morrison established, demonstrating the physical conditioning and technical competence that allowed her to function as an effective team member, rather than a liability requiring special accommodation. When they reached the location indicated by the emergency beacon, they found 3 climbers in a situation that was both medically serious and technically challenging. The lead climber had suffered a compound fracture of his left leg during a fall that had also resulted in a head injury requiring immediate medical attention. His 2 companions were uninjured, but were inadequately equipped for the weather conditions and were showing early signs of hypothermia that would become life-threatening if evacuation was delayed. Maya immediately began assessing the medical condition of all 3 climbers while her teammates established anchor points and prepared the technical systems that would be required for evacuation. Her training allowed her to quickly stabilize the most seriously injured climber, while also providing treatment for the hypothermia that was affecting his companions, demonstrating both technical competence and the ability to prioritize multiple urgent medical requirements. The evacuation operation required the team to lower the injured climber nearly 800 feet down technical terrain while maintaining medical monitoring and ensuring that his condition remained stable throughout the process. Maya served as the primary medical attendant during this operation, managing both the casualty's immediate medical needs and the complex logistics of providing care during a technical rescue in severe weather conditions. The descent took place during deteriorating visibility and increasing wind that made communication difficult and required constant attention to safety procedures for both the rescue team and the injured climber. Maya found that her training had prepared her well for these challenges, allowing her to maintain effective medical care while also contributing to the technical aspects of the rope work and route finding that were essential for a successful evacuation. When they finally reached the evacuation point where helicopter transport could be provided, Maya had successfully maintained the stability of a seriously injured patient through a complex technical rescue operation lasting more than 6 hours in severe winter conditions. The injured climber was transported to medical facilities where he made a complete recovery, while his 2 companions required only minor treatment for cold exposure before being released. Captain Morrison conducted a thorough debriefing of the PLE operation, reviewing both individual and team performance, while identifying lessons learned that would improve future rescue operations. During Maya's individual evaluation, Morrison noted that her medical skills had been essential for the successful outcome of the mission and that her performance during the technical aspects of the rescue had been at the level expected from an experienced team member. "Your contribution to today's operation was exceptional," Morrison said as she completed her assessment. "You demonstrated both the technical competence and the composure under pressure that are essential for effective rescue work. I'm recommending you for advancement to primary medical specialist with full operational responsibilities for medical aspects of future missions." Maya felt a profound sense of satisfaction at this recognition, understanding that Morrison was acknowledging not just her performance during a single mission, but her readiness to assume greater responsibility within the team structure. The months of training and systematic capability development had achieved their intended purpose, transforming her from someone who was considered too small for demanding operational roles into a valued team member whose contributions were essential for mission success. Over the following months, Maya participated in numerous rescue operations that tested every aspect of her training while also providing opportunities to continue developing her skills and expertise. She successfully treated casualties ranging from minor injuries to life-threatening medical emergencies, participated in technical rescues involving complex rope systems and challenging terrain, and demonstrated leadership capabilities that earned the respect of her teammates and superiors. The physical demands of operational rescue work proved to be manageable given the conditioning and preparation she had completed, while the psychological challenges were offset by the systematic training and the support of experienced teammates, who shared both the risks and the satisfaction associated with successful rescue operations. Maya found that the work provided exactly the kind of meaningful challenge she had been seeking throughout her military career. During her 6-month evaluation, Captain Morrison noted that Maya had become an indispensable member of Alpha Team and recommended her for consideration for advanced leadership training that would prepare her for eventual assignment as a team leader. The evaluation highlighted both her technical competence and her ability to function effectively under the kind of extreme stress that characterized the most demanding rescue scenarios. Maya's story became known throughout Camp Ridgeway as an example of how determination and systematic preparation could overcome initial limitations and enable exceptional performance in demanding operational roles. New candidates entering the conditioning program were often told about the small soldier, who had been underestimated initially, but who had earned her place among the elite rescue specialists through persistent effort and unwavering commitment. TO excellence. Her success challenged assumptions about the relationship between physical size and operational capability, demonstrating that effectiveness in rescue work depended more on technical competence, mental toughness, and systematic preparation than on raw physical strength or imposing presence. Maya had proven that courage and capability could not be measured by conventional standards, and that the most important qualifications for demanding work were often the least visible ones. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.